My name is Otis, and at 34 I've built a successful tech business despite being the outsider in my own family. When I mentioned the upcoming reunion at our family dinner, I never expected my brother Jackson to laugh in my face. "You're not invited, it's for real family only," he said with a smirk that burned into my soul. Everyone at the table went silent, but nobody defended me. I just smiled politely and left hiding the devastation I felt after 27 years of trying to belong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if family drama hits close to home, and stick around to see how I turned the tables when they needed my help. I was 7 years old when the Mitchells adopted me after a car accident took both my birth parents. I remember the day clearly, standing in the social worker's office, clutching a small backpack containing everything I owned in the world. Richard and Diane Mitchell seemed like giants to me back then, with their perfect clothes and kind smiles. They already had a son, Jackson, who was 5 at the time and would later have a daughter, Amelia, when I was 12. Those early years were mostly good. Diane made sure I had new clothes that fit properly, enrolled me in the same private elementary school as Jackson, and always made my favorite peanut butter cookies on my birthday. Richard would ruffle my hair and call me champ when I brought home good grades. I felt welcomed, even if there was always this unspoken understanding that I wasn't really theirs. The differences became more apparent as Jackson and I entered middle school. Richard would take Jackson fishing on Saturday mornings, just the two of them. When I asked if I could come along once, Richard patted my shoulder and said, "This is our thing, Otis. Maybe we can find something special for us to do too." But that something special never materialized. Instead, I threw myself into academics. While Jackson struggled with basic algebra, I excelled in advanced math and science. My adoptive mother would beam with pride at parent-teacher conferences, but Richard would simply nod and then quickly ask about Jackson's progress in sports. Amelia initially adored me. As a little girl, she would follow me around the house, asking endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to how computers worked. I taught her to ride a bike when she was 6, spending hours running alongside her down our suburban street, until she finally found her balance. But as she entered her teenage years, she began to gravitate more toward Jackson. I'd hear them laughing behind closed doors, the conversation stopping abruptly when I walked by. High school solidified the divisions in our family. Richard had attended Westfield Prep and made it clear that Jackson would follow in his footsteps. I was enrolled there too, but it was made clear that this was a financial stretch, something I should be grateful for. I heard Richard telling Diane one night, "We're spending as much on Otis as we are on our own son." Those words cut deep, but I channeled that hurt into determination. I graduated as valedictorian while Jackson barely maintained a C average. I earned a partial scholarship to State University, but it wasn't enough to cover all expenses. While Jackson was sent to an expensive private college with all costs covered, I worked 3 part-time jobs between classes to make ends meet. My computer science degree opened doors, and I started my career at a mid-sized tech company while Jackson was still changing majors for the 3rd time. By the time he finally graduated with a business degree that Richard had essentially purchased through donations to the school, I had been promoted twice. The family dynamics continued to evolve in predictable ways. Richard would occasionally call me for advice when his manufacturing business needed to update its systems, but he never fully acknowledged my expertise. He would introduce Jackson to his business associates as my son, the future of Mitchell Manufacturing, while I was simply Otis, who works in computers. Diane tried in her quiet way to balance things. She would call me regularly to check in, send care packages to my small apartment, and make sure to highlight my accomplishments at family gatherings. But she never directly confronted Richard's obvious favoritism, and over time, her efforts became less energetic, as if she too had accepted the unspoken family hierarchy. By my late 20s, I had founded my own tech consulting firm. The business grew rapidly, securing contracts with several Fortune 500 companies. I bought a comfortable condo in the city, invested wisely, and built a substantial savings account, all while Jackson bounced between jobs at his father's company, never quite living up to Richard's expectations, but always receiving 2nd, 3rd, and 4th chances. Despite everything, I kept showing up for Sunday dinners once a month. I sent thoughtful birthday and Christmas gifts. I remembered anniversaries and milestones. I tried to be the son they never fully accepted, hoping that someday my persistence would pay off in genuine family connection. Looking back now, I realize I was setting myself up for the heartbreak that was inevitable from the start. By my early 30s, my tech consulting business had grown from a one-man operation to a respected firm with 28 employees. The pivotal moment came 5 years ago when I landed Collins International as a client, a multinational corporation that needed a complete digital transformation. I worked 80-hour weeks for months, sleeping on the office couch more often than in my own bed. When we successfully completed the project ahead of schedule and under budget, Collins signed a multi-year contract that instantly tripled my company's revenue. Success came in waves after that. My expertise in streamlining supply chain management systems through custom software solutions became highly sought after. Within 3 years, Mitchell Tech Solutions, yes, I had kept the family name for my business, still seeking some form of connection, was generating annual revenues in the millions. I moved from my modest condo to a penthouse apartment in Westview Towers, though I kept my lifestyle relatively simple compared to my income. While my professional life flourished, I continued making efforts to maintain family connections. Those monthly Sunday dinners became increasingly uncomfortable as the contrast between my success and Jackson's stagnation became impossible to ignore. Richard would ask vague questions about my computer stuff, before quickly steering the conversation toward topics where Jackson could participate more confidently. My friend Marcus, who served as my company's chief operations officer, often questioned my dedication to these family obligations. "You're successful despite them, not because of them," he'd say after hearing about another awkward dinner. "You don't owe them your time or emotional energy." But something in me couldn't let go of the hope that achievement would finally make me feel like a true member of the family. Around this time, Richard's business began facing serious challenges. The manufacturing sector was changing rapidly, and Mitchell Manufacturing hadn't adapted quickly enough to new technologies and global competition. I offered suggestions and even proposed collaboration between our companies, but Richard would smile tightly and say, "We've been doing this for 3 generations. We'll weather this storm our way." What I didn't know then was that their way involved taking out second and third mortgages on their home and liquidating retirement accounts. Richard's pride prevented him from admitting how dire the situation had become, until a particularly desperate moment when he asked me for a temporary business loan of $60,000. I transferred the money immediately, drawing up proper loan documents out of habit, though I never really expected repayment. Jackson, meanwhile, had launched several businesses of his own: a sports memorabilia shop, a premium dog food delivery service, and most recently, a craft brewery. Each venture followed the same pattern: initial enthusiasm, poor management, declining interest, and eventual failure. After each collapse, he would return to a position at his father's company, where his failures were quietly absorbed into the larger business's struggling finances. My sister Amelia had married Bradley Worthington, heir to a regional banking fortune. Bradley made no effort to hide his disdain for my adopted status, often making comments about good breeding and quality stock within my earshot. Amelia, eager to secure her position in Bradley's wealthy family, rarely challenged these remarks, and sometimes even joined in with subtle jabs about real Mitchells. One particularly painful aspect of this period was watching Diane's health decline. She developed rheumatoid arthritis that progressively worsened, requiring specialized treatments not fully covered by insurance. When I overheard her telling Richard they might need to reduce her medication due to costs, I anonymously arranged with her doctor to cover all her medical expenses. For 3 years, I paid $1,500 monthly for her treatments, never telling anyone in the family that I was the source of this mysterious financial assistance. Despite my professional achievements and financial security, a profound loneliness had settled into my life. I dated occasionally, but relationships inevitably fizzled when I couldn't fully open up about my family's situation, or when prospective partners sensed the unresolved pain I carried. I built a beautiful home, but rarely entertained. I could afford luxury vacations, but typically traveled alone for business, extending trips by a day or two to see the sights in solitude. Marcus remained my closest friend and confidant, but even he didn't know the full extent of my financial support to the Mitchell family. Besides the direct loans and medical payments, there were countless smaller expenditures covering Amelia's wedding costs. When Richard's contribution fell short, helping with property taxes when they came due, unexpectedly paying for a family vacation rental that I was invariably too busy to enjoy alongside everyone else. In the weeks leading up to that fateful dinner, I had felt a rare sense of optimism about my place in the family. Richard had actually called to ask my advice about potentially computerizing some aspects of his factory operations. Jackson had been civil during our last few interactions. The annual family reunion was approaching, an event that typically drew Mitchells from across the country for a weekend at a lakeside resort. I had always attended, usually covering half the expenses quietly through direct payments to the venue. This year would mark 30 years since the Mitchells had adopted me, and something in me hoped for some acknowledgement, some sign that after all this time I was truly one of them. How wrong I was. The evening started like any other monthly family dinner. I arrived at the Mitchell family home, the same two-story colonial where I'd spent my childhood, at exactly 6 o'clock, a bottle of Diane's favorite Pinot Noir in hand. Richard answered the door with his standard greeting, a firm handshake and a pat on the shoulder that never quite became a full embrace. The house smelled of pot roast and fresh rolls, Diane's signature Sunday dinner. In the living room, Jackson was already nursing a beer, scrolling through his phone with the detached expression he wore whenever I was around. Amelia and Bradley sat on the love seat, their posture perfect and matching in a way that seemed rehearsed. "Otis. So good to see you," Diane called from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her smile was genuine, if tired, the lines around her eyes deeper than they'd been a month ago. I gave her a gentle hug, careful of her painful joints, and offered the wine. "You shouldn't have," she said, the same words she said every time, though we both knew the gesture was expected. Dinner conversation followed its usual pattern, carefully choreographed small talk that avoided any meaningful exchange. Richard complained about new environmental regulations affecting his factory. Bradley made comments about the stock market that were deliberately oversimplified, as if I couldn't possibly understand financial matters despite running a successful business. Amelia detailed her charity committee's plans for a fundraising gala. I noticed the tension in the room seemed heightened, with odd glances exchanged between Jackson and Richard, but I pushed forward with my usual strategy of pleasant engagement. When there was a lull in conversation, I mentioned my preparations for the upcoming family reunion. "I've blocked off that whole week," I said, genuinely excited. "I thought I might come up to the lake a few days early to get some fishing in before everyone arrives." "Jackson, remember that monster bass you caught last year? I'm determined to break your record this time." The silence that followed my comment was immediate and heavy. Jackson looked at Richard, who suddenly became very interested in cutting his pot roast. Then Jackson let out a sharp laugh that felt like a slap. "You're not invited," he said, his voice carrying a cruel edge. "I hadn't heard since our teenage years. It's for real family, only this time." The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to contradict him. Richard cleared his throat but said nothing. Diane stared down at her plate, her knuckles white around her fork. Amelia exchanged a glance with Bradley, who barely suppressed a smirk. "I don't understand," I said carefully, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I've attended every reunion for the past 26 years. Well, things change." Jackson continued, emboldened by the lack of opposition. "Aunt Margaret is hosting this year, and she wants to keep it intimate. You know, blood relatives. It's really about space limitations," Richard finally offered weakly, not meeting my eyes. "Don't sugarcoat it, Dad," Amelia chimed in, her voice carrying the same entitled tone she'd developed since marrying Bradley. "We've been talking about this for months. The reunion should be for actual Mitchells." Bradley nodded sagely. "Blood is thicker than water, after all. No offense intended, Otis." But the offense was clearly intended, and the calculated nature of this ambush became apparent. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. They had discussed this, planned it, and chosen to deliver the news in this public, humiliating way, rather than privately, with any semblance of compassion. I felt something shift inside me, like tectonic plates grinding against each other before a catastrophic break. But years of navigating this family's emotional terrain had taught me to mask my reactions. I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate, forced my face into a neutral expression, and stood up. I see, I said simply. Well, thank you for letting me know. I just remembered I have an early client meeting tomorrow that I need to prepare for. Diane, dinner was delicious as always. You don't have to leave. Otis, Diane said quietly, finally looking up with distress in her eyes. It's no problem. I really do have that meeting, I lied smoothly. Richard, Jackson, Amelia, Bradley, enjoy the rest of your evening. I walked to the door with measured steps, retrieved my jacket from the coat closet, and let myself out. No one followed me. No one called after me. The only sound was the resumption of conversation at the table, as if a minor interruption had been handled, and now normal service could resume. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur. Traffic lights, other cars, the familiar landmarks of the city, all registered dimly, as if viewed through frosted glass. I maintained my composure through sheer force of will until I reached the privacy of my penthouse. Only then, standing in my expansive living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city full of people who weren't my family, did I allow the mask to drop. I sank onto my custom leather couch, put my head in my hands, and felt 27 years of rejection crash over me like a tidal wave. Real family only. The words replayed in my mind, each repetition another cut. After nearly 3 decades of trying to earn my place among them through achievement, through generosity, through unwavering loyalty, I was still the outsider, the adopted child, the one who didn't belong. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness watching the city lights blur through tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed in years. By morning the pain had crystallized into something harder, something that would eventually give me the strength to do what needed to be done. The next morning I threw myself into work with an intensity that alarmed even my most dedicated employees. I arrived at the office before 7 scheduled back-to-back meetings and reviewed contracts until well past midnight. The same pattern followed for 3 straight days, a deliberate immersion in professional demands to avoid the emotional wreckage, waiting whenever I allowed myself to think about the dinner. Diane called multiple times each day. I sent her texts saying I was swamped with an important project but would call when things settled down. It wasn't entirely untrue. We were finalizing a major contract with a healthcare system that required my attention, but the real reason I couldn't talk to her was that I didn't trust myself to maintain composure. What could she possibly say that would erase what had happened? What explanation could justify the family's collective decision to formalize my exclusion after all these years? By the 4th day, Marcus cornered me in my office well after everyone else had gone home. "You look like hell," he said bluntly, dropping into the chair across from my desk. "And you've been acting like a man running from something. What happened?" I hadn't planned to tell him, but once I started speaking, the whole story poured out: the dinner, Jackson's announcement, the family's silent complicity, my dignified exit, followed by private devastation. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with each new detail. When I finished, he leaned forward, his voice unusually gentle. "Otis, I've watched you bend over backward for these people for years. You've tolerated their disrespect, overlooked their slights, and continued showing up with nothing but generosity. And this is how they repay you. By explicitly excluding you from a family event you've attended your entire life. It's time to stand up for yourself, man." "What's the point?" I asked, the weariness in my voice surprising even me. "They've made their feelings clear." "The point is self-respect," Marcus replied. "And boundaries. You've been financially supporting people who don't even have the decency to treat you with basic respect." His comment about financial support triggered something in my memory. I had recently been organizing my personal financial records in preparation for a meeting with my accountant. Opening my laptop, I pulled up the spreadsheet where I tracked family loans and other support. What I saw shocked even me, who had lived through each individual transaction. Listed in neat rows were all the times I had stepped in to help the Mitchell family financially. Jackson's business loans that were never repaid totaled $45,000 across his 3 failed ventures. The monthly transfers to Diane's specialist, $1,500 every month for 3 years, amounted to $54,000. Richard's temporary business bailout last year, $60,000, with not a dollar repaid despite the signed agreement promising quarterly payments. Amelia's wedding contribution, $25,000 that Richard had asked me to provide when his business was having a temporary cash flow issue. The lake house mortgage that I paid half of, despite using it maybe one weekend a year, $72,000 over 6 years. Various smaller expenses, holiday gifts, family vacations I rarely attended, emergency car repairs, property taxes, added tens of thousands more to the total. As I stared at the final sum, a wave of anger finally broke through the hurt that had dominated my emotions since the dinner. Over $250,000, I said quietly. That's what I've given them, Marcus. And they can't even include me in a family reunion. Jesus, Otis. I knew you helped them, but this is... Marcus trailed off, looking at the screen in disbelief. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a banking alert for a new transfer request from Richard Mitchell for $2,800. The attached message read, "Need to cover some family reunion expenses. We'll pay back next month. Thanks." The audacity was breathtaking. Not only had they explicitly excluded me from the event, but Richard was now asking me to help pay for it. Looking at that request, something finally snapped inside me. The good son, the grateful adoptee, the perpetual outsider, desperate for approval, that version of me died in that moment, replaced by someone who could finally see the situation with painful clarity. "No more," I said, my voice steady and certain. Marcus looked up from the spreadsheet. "No more what?" "No more financing their lives while they treat me like I'm disposable. No more pretending we're a family when it's convenient for their bank accounts, but not when it comes to actual inclusion. No more." I picked up my phone and took a screenshot of Richard's transfer request. Then I denied the transaction and sent Richard the screenshot with a simple message, "Payment denied. Must be that family-only policy." Then I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and for the first time in days I felt something other than pain. It wasn't quite peace, but it was something adjacent to it, the calming certainty that comes with finally honoring your own worth. I hadn't expected an immediate response to my denial of Richard's fund request, but my phone exploded with notifications within minutes of turning it back on the next morning. 6 missed calls from Richard. 4 from Jackson. 9 text messages that escalated from confusion to anger to thinly veiled threats about ruining family relationships over a misunderstanding. The most revealing text came from Richard. "Don't know what game you're playing, but we need that money today. Margaret expects deposit for reunion venue by noon." No apology. No acknowledgement of the connection between my exclusion and my unwillingness to fund said exclusion. Just entitlement wrapped in urgency. Jackson's voicemail was less restrained. "What the hell, Otis? Dad said you're refusing to help with the reunion. After everything this family has done for you, real mature. Fix this or there will be consequences." Everything this family has done for me. The phrase echoed in my mind as I reviewed my financial records again. The irony was almost painful. Amelia's contribution came via email, a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. "I'm disappointed in you, Otis. Mom is upset, and you know stress isn't good for her condition. Is this really how you want to repay the family that took you in when no one else would? We can discuss the reunion situation, but withholding financial support is petty and cruel." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I met with my financial advisor to review all outstanding loans to the Mitchell family and called my lawyer to discuss the enforceability of the loan agreements Richard and Jackson had signed. By late afternoon, Diane finally called. Unlike the others, she'd left only a single voicemail asking me to call when I felt ready to talk. Her voice had been soft-tinged with what sounded like genuine remorse. After taking a deep breath, I returned her call. "Otis," she answered immediately. "Thank you for calling back. I've been so worried." "I'm fine, Diane," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Just busy with work. Richard told me about the misunderstanding with the money transfer. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I'm not funding a family reunion I've been explicitly uninvited from." A long pause followed. "I'm sorry about what happened at dinner. The things that were said were unkind." "Unkind," I repeated. "Try cruel and exclusionary after 27 years as part of this family. And the worst part is you all sat there and let it happen. You didn't say a word in my defense." Her voice cracked. "I know. I should have said something. It's just that Richard and Jackson had been discussing it for weeks, and I thought—" "Wait," I interrupted. "You knew about this decision beforehand. You all planned to ambush me at dinner." Another painful silence confirmed what I'd already suspected. "I didn't agree with them," she finally said. "But you know how Richard gets when he makes up his mind and with the financial pressure he's been under." "So this is about money," I said flatly. "Excluding me is somehow financially motivated." No, she backpedaled quickly. "That's not what I meant." But something in her voice told me I'd stumbled onto a truth she hadn't meant to reveal. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Richard's increasing financial requests, Jackson's resentment, the timing of my exclusion, right when reunion expenses needed covering. "Diane," I said slowly, "I need to ask you something and I need an honest answer. Has Richard been counting on my contributions to the family, the loans, the medical payments? All of it while simultaneously deciding I'm not really family?" Her hesitation told me everything. "It's complicated, Otis. You've been so generous and we're grateful, but the business has been struggling and with my medical bills." "Stop," I said quietly. "Just stop. I've been financially supporting this family for years, while you've all been deciding I'm not really one of you. Do you have any idea how that feels?" "Otis, please." "No, I'm done pleading for acceptance. I'm done financing my own rejection." After ending the call with Diane, I composed a formal email to Richard, Jackson, Amelia, and Bradley. I detailed every loan, gift, and financial contribution I'd made to the family over the past decade, complete with dates, amounts, and copies of agreements where they existed. I explained that I was removing myself from the Lake House mortgage and ownership effective immediately, and that all outstanding loans were now due within 30 days per the written agreements they had signed. The email was direct but not angry, simply a factual accounting of the financial reality they had taken for granted while deciding I wasn't really family. I ended with, "I have valued my connection to the Mitchell family for 27 years, often at significant personal and financial cost. I now understand that this connection has been primarily one of convenience for most of you. Consider this notice that the Bank of Otis is permanently closed." I sent the email, then turned off my phone again. That night, I had my first real conversation with my therapist in years. Dr. Lawrence had helped me work through adoption-related identity issues in my 20s, and now I needed his guidance again. "What you're feeling is perfectly valid," he told me, after I recounted recent events. "You've spent most of your life trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Setting boundaries isn't just appropriate, it's necessary for your emotional health." "I feel guilty," I admitted, "especially about Diane's medical treatments." "You can support Diane's health needs directly with the providers if you choose to," he suggested. "But the larger pattern of financial dependency they've established with you is unhealthy for everyone involved. Breaking that pattern is an act of self-respect." The next day passed in eerie silence. No calls, no texts, no emails from any Mitchell family member. I immersed myself in work, had dinner with Marcus and his wife, and returned home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The clarity that comes with finally standing up for yourself after years of accommodation is its own kind of peace. That peace was short-lived. 2 days after I sent the email at precisely 7:32 in the evening, 3 sharp knocks thundered against my apartment door. I wasn't expecting visitors, and the building had a doorman who typically announced guests, so the unannounced arrival was unusual. When I checked the peephole, I was startled to see Richard, Jackson, and Bradley standing in the hallway. Richard's face was flushed with anger. Jackson was pacing nervously, and Bradley stood slightly apart, his expression a mixture of disdain and calculation. For a moment I considered not answering, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable and perhaps necessary. I opened the door but remained in the doorway, blocking their entry. "We need to talk," Richard said, attempting to step forward. "I've said everything I needed to say in my email," I replied calmly. "You can't just cut us off like this," Jackson interjected. "We're family." The irony of his statement after the real family-only comment wasn't lost on me. I think recent events have clarified that I'm not actually considered family, I said. But we can talk. Come in. I led them into my living room but remained standing as they took seats. The contrast between their tense postures and the peaceful city view behind them was striking. Richard spoke first, his tone oscillating between conciliatory and demanding. Otis, this situation has gotten out of hand. Jackson misspoke at dinner. Of course you're part of the family. Misspoke, I repeated. And everyone else just happened to agree with this misspeaking. And you all just happened to have discussed this misspeaking for weeks beforehand, according to Diane. Richard shot a quick glance at Jackson before continuing. Look, things have been said that shouldn't have been said. We can work this out. But cutting off all financial support without warning is extreme. Without warning, I laughed incredulously. You explicitly excluded me from a family event while continuing to expect me to help fund it. That was my warning. Jackson's facade of calm cracked first. You've always done this, acted superior because you got good grades and built a successful business. Some of us weren't given every advantage. I stared at him, genuinely stunned by the distortion of reality. What advantages, Jackson? You went to private school on your parents' dime while I worked after classes to contribute. You had college fully funded while I worked 3 jobs between classes. You've had multiple businesses bankrolled by family money, including mine, while I built mine from nothing. That's different, he muttered. How? How is it different, I pressed. Because you were lucky. Your company took off while mine struggled. And Dad always expected more from me because I'm his real son. There it was, the core of his resentment laid bare. Bradley, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward with the confident air of someone about to deliver a killing blow. The loan agreements you referenced aren't as binding as you think. Our family attorneys have reviewed them, and there are several avenues we could pursue to challenge enforcement. I turned to him, oddly grateful for his transparent attempt at intimidation. Your family attorneys should review them more carefully, Bradley. Every document was prepared by Levinson and Associates, one of the top contract law firms in the state. But please pursue those avenues. I'd be happy to have this all examined in open court, including the pattern of financial dependency and the recent explicit statements about my family status. Bradley's expression faltered slightly, but Richard cut in before he could respond. This isn't about legal documents, Otis. This is about family obligations. Exactly, I agreed. Family obligations, like including adopted children in family events, like defending family members when they're being mistreated, like not treating someone as an ATM while simultaneously declaring they're not real family. Richard's composed facade finally cracked. You don't understand the pressure we're under. The business is failing. Jackson's brewery is underwater, and we've been using your loans to keep everything afloat. Without your money, we might lose the house. The admission hung in the air like a revelation, though it merely confirmed what I'd already suspected. So that's what this is really about, I said quietly. You need my money, but you don't want me. That's not fair, Richard protested, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. Isn't it you've been using the loans to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford? Jackson's failures have been cushioned by my success, and all while you've been deciding I'm not really a Mitchell. What do you want from us? Jackson demanded. An apology. Fine, I'm sorry I said you weren't invited. Now will you help with the money? His insincerity was so transparent it was almost comical. I want nothing from you, I replied. That's the point. For years I wanted acceptance inclusion, to be treated like a real member of this family. I'm finally accepting that's never going to happen, and I'm no longer willing to finance my own rejection. This is ridiculous. Richard exploded, standing suddenly. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Richard? I interrupted, my voice deadly calm. Adopted me. Yes. Provided basic necessities through childhood. Yes. But love me equally. Accept me fully. Defend me when I was excluded. No. We don't have to stand here and take this, Jackson said, also rising. You're right. You don't. And I'm asking you all to leave now. We're not finished discussing this, Richard insisted. I am, I stated firmly. The terms are in the email. The loan repayments begin in 30 days. I've already instructed my attorney to begin proceedings if the schedule isn't met. You ungrateful Jackson began stepping toward me with clenched fists. That's enough, I cut him off. Leave now, or I'll call building security. They didn't move. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. Jackson was practically vibrating with rage, and Bradley was rapidly texting someone on his phone, likely his family attorneys. I picked up my phone and called down to the lobby. Edward, this is Otis Mitchell in Penthouse B. I have 3 visitors who are refusing to leave. Could you please send security up, thank you. The threat of public embarrassment finally broke their resolve. Richard pointed a finger at me. This isn't over, Otis. Families disagree, but cutting us off financially over one comment is unconscionable. It wasn't one comment, I replied as they moved reluctantly toward the door. It was 27 years of conditional acceptance culminating in explicit rejection. I'm simply finally accepting what you've been showing me all along. Security arrived as they were leaving, escorting them to the elevator, and then out of the building. I watched from my window as they emerged on the street below, Richard gesticulating wildly as they walked to their car. That night, my phone lit up with messages from extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, all expressing disappointment in my abandonment of Richard and Jackson in their time of need. It was clear they'd been given a highly edited version of events. Several messages mentioned my jealousy of Jackson and my manipulation of the family's finances. After reading dozens of these messages, I composed a single factual response that I sent to everyone. I've contributed over $250,000 to support the Mitchell family over the past decade. Last week I was explicitly uninvited from the family reunion because I'm not considered real family. I'm simply aligning my financial support with this new understanding of my family status. I attached documentation of the major contributions, loan agreements, transfer receipts, medical payment records, and sent it to everyone. Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a scotch, and watched the city lights below, feeling oddly liberated despite the pain. 4 months passed before I had any significant contact with any Mitchell family member. In that time, I focused on rebuilding my life around authentic connections rather than obligation. My company continued to thrive, expanding into new markets and adding 15 employees. I bought a cabin in the mountains, 2 hours from the city, not a flashy vacation home like the family lake house, but a peaceful retreat where I could fish, hike, and reconnect with myself. My therapy sessions with Dr. Lawrence became a weekly constant, helping me process the grief of losing my adoptive family, while acknowledging that much of what I'd lost had been illusion rather than reality. You're mourning the family you wanted them to be, he observed during one particularly difficult session, not necessarily the family they actually were. The most surprising development came from unexpected quarters. After my mass email to the extended Mitchell family with documentation of my financial support, 3 cousins and an aunt reached out separately to express their shock at how I'd been treated. Cousin Rachel, who I'd always enjoyed talking with at family gatherings, called to tell me she'd had no idea about my exclusion from the reunion. That's not how our family is supposed to treat people, she said firmly. Adopted or not, you're a Mitchell. Period. Aunt Susan, Richard's sister, wrote a lengthy email apologizing for her brother's behavior and sharing that she'd decided not to attend the reunion in protest. I always thought you were the best of us, she wrote. The most gracious, the most generous. How Richard failed to see that is beyond me. These unexpected connections became a source of healing. Rachel and I began meeting for coffee regularly. Aunt Susan invited me to her home for dinner and introduced me to family members from her husband's side who welcomed me without question. 2 other cousins, Mark and David, reached out to catch up, mentioning they'd always felt somewhat sidelined by Richard's branch of the family too. My friendship with Marcus deepened as I finally allowed myself to be vulnerable about my family history. His unwavering support and righteous anger on my behalf helped validate feelings I'd suppressed for decades. Through therapy, I also discovered a support group for adult adoptees, navigating complex family dynamics. The relief of being among people who intrinsically understood the unique challenges of adoption was profound. One group member, Natalie, particularly understood my experience of conditional acceptance. Our shared experiences led to a friendship that gradually blossomed into something more. As for the Mitchell family proper, the consequences of my financial withdrawal played out exactly as Richard had feared. Jackson had to sell his luxury SUV to cover brewery debts. Richard and Diane downsized from the family home to a smaller house in a less prestigious neighborhood. The family lake house was sold to cover other obligations. The family reunion proceeded without me, though Aunt Susan reported it was sparsely attended and somewhat subdued. The loan agreements were another matter. Despite Bradley's threats of legal action, no challenges materialized. Instead, Richard made minimal monthly payments that barely covered interest. Jackson made no payments at all. I didn't pursue aggressive collection. The agreement served more as documentation of the truth than as debts I expected to recover. 3 months after the confrontation, Diane reached out again. Her message was simple. I miss you. I'm sorry. Can we talk? After discussing it with Dr. Lawrence, I agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral location. She looked older, more tired than I remembered, the stress of recent months evident in new lines around her eyes. I failed you, she said without preamble. I should have stood up for you at that dinner and 100 times before it. I let Richard's stronger personality override what I knew was right, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Her apology was the first truly genuine one I'd received from any of them. We talked for over 2 hours. She explained that Richard's business was now officially in bankruptcy proceedings, that Jackson was living in their guest room after his apartment lease wasn't renewed, and that Amelia and Bradley had distanced themselves when it became clear there would be no more financial assistance forthcoming. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, she assured me. You did exactly what you should have done. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I see clearly now. I see how I took your generosity for granted, while allowing you to be treated as less than family. I'm deeply ashamed. I believed her remorse was genuine. After careful consideration, I arranged to cover her medical treatments directly with her providers, again but maintained firm boundaries around any other financial assistance. We began a cautious rebuilding of our relationship, coffee every few weeks. Occasional phone calls, but I made it clear that my boundaries with Richard and Jackson remained firm. 6 months after the confrontation, I hosted what Natalie jokingly called an authentic family reunion at my mountain cabin. Marcus and his family came. Rachel and her husband joined us. Aunt Susan made her famous apple pie. 3 friends from my adoption support group rounded out the gathering. We fished, hiked, played board games, and shared meals, without the undercurrent of tension that had characterized Mitchell family events. Around this time, I also established the Mitchell Adoption Foundation, providing educational and emotional support resources for adopted children and their families. The foundation's first initiative funded therapy services for adoptees navigating identity issues, something I wished I'd had access to earlier in life. Richard called once during this period, his tone awkwardly conciliatory, but still lacking true accountability. We should put this unpleasantness behind us, he suggested. Family disagreements happen, but blood, I mean family, is what matters in the end. You're right, Richard, I replied. Family is what matters. True family, the kind built on mutual respect, support, and love, not obligation and convenience. I'm building that kind of family now. He didn't call again. A year after the dinner incident that changed everything, I sat on the deck of my cabin with Natalie beside me, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant orange and pink. Our relationship had grown steadily, built on a foundation of honest communication and shared understanding of adoption's complexities. Do you regret it? She asked, her hand warm in mine. Setting those boundaries with your adoptive family. I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret the years I spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. But standing up for myself, no, that I don't regret at all. The peace I've found since establishing those boundaries has been transformative. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or legal documents, but by consistent love and respect. Sometimes the family we create for ourselves is more genuine than the one we're born or adopted into. If you're struggling with similar family dynamics, adopted or not, remember that your worth isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for emotional health. And sometimes walking away from toxic relationships is the beginning of truly finding yourself. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you through that process? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, your true family consists of people who love you without conditions or exceptions. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to honor your worth in all your relationships.